Thanks for joining me here today. Today I wanted to cover off a topic really quite quickly if I possibly can, which is an ongoing conversation that's happening at the moment around identification, self-identification. There's a consultation that's been happening in the UK, which is looking to propose change to the law which would allow people to identify their gender themselves rather than having to go through a lot of legal formalities and paperwork in order to be able to get that officially recognised. Really to allow someone to say, look, it doesn't matter what you see on the outside, this is who I am on the inside, and that's what's important. Now, that's something which is under consultation. There's been a number of organised campaigns to help people who do not support this to push back against this and to put let's say a negative or concerned slant on this consultation about what this might do. And most of that is couched around the conversation of protection of spaces for women. Women's only spaces. Spaces where women are vulnerable. Now, the kind of examples might be anything. If you think about spaces that are designated as female, the most common one where we get overlap in this arena is bathrooms. Then you have things like changing rooms. And then at the more extreme end, and I think where people are genuinely the most vulnerable, you have things like battered women's shelters, places where abused women can seek refuge from men in their life in an environment that is more comfortable for them because it does not include men there. And I think this is where we need to talk about gradations. So I've been having a think about this recently because I can completely understand a concern that a man might claim to be female in order to be able to access a battered woman's shelter in order to get new access to his wife. Except that the whole point of that place, of that existence, is to protect someone against an abusive person. Whether that person can or cannot go into that shelter, I don't see as, let's say, necessarily a good argument for or against this particular issue of self-gender recognition. To my mind, when women are genuinely vulnerable from threat, from harm, of course they should be protected. Protected under the law from threats of harm and of abuse. And I think in these kind of environments, you would hope that common sense would prevail and that if a husband said, I want to get in here to get access to my wife, and by claiming that they couldn't be kept out because of their gender, my argument would be you're kept out because you're a wife beater. You're kept out because you're abusive. You're kept out because, frankly, you should be in jail. And it's not the gender recognition, to my mind, or the gender of the person that prevents them going in. It's their actions. It's the kind of person that they are. And that is why I can see the concern, but I think that is a very exclusive case and one that perhaps there should be better protection for these women in general from abusive husbands and partners, family members, whoever it happens to be. I think that's quite critical. Then we come on to other things like changing spaces and toilets. Now, I would have to make an argument that I regularly self-gender identify. And I do this in a particular way. When I go out dressed as Juliette, I think of myself as kind of female. I put myself in a female mode. To which extent I will use the ladies' bathrooms. Because I don't think that I, as I am right now, fit naturally into the men's bathrooms. And if we want to talk about people being vulnerable, I would argue that I am probably as vulnerable as anyone is likely to be in a men's bathroom if I go in dressed like this. I must be getting towards the top level of vulnerability of any section of society going into a men's bathroom dressed as I am today. So I choose to use the women's bathroom, by which extent I kind of self-identify. I identify as being female for the purposes of using a space that has a female logo, a female symbol on the front of it. And therefore I go in and use that space. I do not, however, use women's changing rooms because when I'm changing, what's underneath, the thing I'm changing from to, is male. So when I cross-dress dressed. And therefore, changing would mean changing out of male into female. Having said that, if I was going out dressed like this and I went into a women's shop to buy an item of clothing, I would go use the women's changing rooms, because obviously I kind of belong in the women's changing rooms. And I think that's where some of this fear about these female only places tends to be somewhat stoked up and exaggerated. I've never understood why it is that cross-dressers or people who are transgendered are seen as a threat to young girls in women's toilets somehow. You know, fathers saying, I don't want my daughter spending time or being in the toilets with someone like that. I don't know why we're a threat to your daughters, but not your sons. You know, where do you want us to be? What bathroom, what place should we be in? And I think this is where, when it comes down to it, the campaign that is being put forward, this kind of fear of men invading women's spaces, we know that statistically speaking, this isn't true. There are hardly any, and I think we're talking about single digit incidents of anyone dressing as the opposite gender in order to gain access to a location where they shouldn't be in order to then prey on or abuse women. We're talking about a tiny, tiny, tiny number, single digit numbers. The stats on this they speak for themselves, but the fear of it is that much more prevalent. And the fear seems to be a real thing that is out there and is potentially weighing on people's minds. And to me, I find that quite disturbing, mainly because the vast majority of us, cis men, cis women, trans men, trans women, cross-dressers, the vast majority of us don't pose a threat to other people. And the vast majority of public spaces, be they bathrooms, be they changing rooms, etc., ought to be able to exist in the acknowledgement that the people you see in those areas are no threat to you. They are normal people, human beings going about their daily life. And I think that gets missed out. I think what this really boils down to ultimately, and this is this whole argument about private spaces for women. When I get asked the question, why do you use the ladies' toilets? And I do get asked this question. My answer is normally, do I look like I belong in the men's toilets? Is that where I look like I belong? The answer is always inevitably no. Of course, you don't look like you belong in the men's toilets. The unspoken comment that is never really vocalized after that is, where do I belong then? And I've always suspected, as I've said on previous videos, that the answer to the question, where do I actually belong, is at home, where I don't have to see you, where we don't need to put up with you and the way that you look. And that seems to be the issue behind this. I don't doubt that there are people out there who are perhaps dealing with very vulnerable women who have been targeted by men, who would like to see some form of additional protection brought in to look after those women. But they are the victim of crimes. And therefore they should have recourse to avenues of pursuit to protect them as victims of crimes. The rest of us in things like women's toilets, women's changing rooms, etc., it feels to me like it's much more a case of, we don't want to see you. I don't want to have to look at you. I don't want to acknowledge that you're in the world. It would be much better if you simply did what you did in your house, in your home, in your flat, somewhere private where I don't have to see it and I don't have to look at it. And that seems to be the general underlying tone that's going on with this campaign, particularly this campaign against people who want to self-identify. I would like the ability to walk out of my door basically saying, today I'm female. I'm going to use the women's bathrooms because of course I am. But on other days I'll walk out and I'll be male and I'll use the male bathrooms. And I self-identify very clearly in the way I show you who and what I am. Now that works for me. It's not necessarily going to work for other people. It really doesn't work for people who are somewhat androgynous. You know, what do they do? You know, where are they supposed to go if we're going to judge people by how they look? And I think that is a real It's a real problem of fear that's being whipped up against this community and is, let's say, being used to help people target us based on probably having never met one of us. And I'm sure that that's one of the big things. Largely in life, I don't know many people who fear something they know particularly well. If you met one of us, if you spent time talking to us, if you had to bump into us and saw us going about our daily business, for example, in a bathroom that you were using, you might understand that that wasn't so bad. It wasn't the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my life. And you would still be no less protected against threats from aggressive or abusive people that we have laws to deal with. And I think this is something that I've seen debated. I've seen it coming up repeatedly. I've read the marketing, if you will, around the kind of anti-campaign against self-identification. I can understand some of their points. I can understand why this is scary. I can understand why it's something that perhaps you feel makes you vulnerable. But to hold back so many people, and this is a growing area, strata of society. I'm not convinced there are more of us than there have ever been, but I think we are more public. We are more visible than we have ever been in the past. And therefore, there is a moment. There's a moment now to look at reasonable ways forward. And that's all this consultation is doing. It's asking people to express their opinion based on what would actually be the problem with doing this gender self-identification. What would really be the problem? If I walk out and I say, today I'm female, obviously, tomorrow I'll be male. Later today, I'll be male. For the purposes of bathroom use, that's what I'm going to be. I'm going to be female today, later on I'll be male. And I don't necessarily see what the problem is with that. But I'm interested in whether anyone has any thoughts on this. I know it's a very tricky area. It's one of those areas like women and men in sports and trans women playing sports and trans men playing sports. And, how do we keep women safe from or competitive against trans men, trans women? How do you do that? And I think it's one of those things that it's a very difficult time to be right now because of so much fluctuation, so much change is happening. It probably seems like it's constant change, constant pressure to adapt, to do things differently, to accommodate so many people who, frankly, you don't know why they're there. Why do they exist? You don't understand it. It's not your thing. Why do we need to accommodate everyone? Why can't we just accommodate the majority? Well, that's what we've been doing for thousands of years. We've been accommodating the majority, and finding the space and time to accommodate the minority and to understand the minority isn't the most difficult thing. It's certainly not the worst thing that we can do with our time. And therefore, if anyone has voted on this, or anyone is giving their thoughts on this idea of gender self-identification, my argument is I do it every day. I wake up and I make a choice on that day. What am I going to be? How am I going to express myself today? There is a difference between identification and expression. And for me, this is why identification, at no point do I think I am a woman. I don't think I'm now a woman. I am who I am. I am what I am, which I know that underneath this is a genetic male, but my expression is clearly female. And therefore, since you may find it difficult to tell what I am, since all I want to do is use the bathroom, then why not just let me use the one I prefer? That I don't understand. I don't understand why that's necessarily so difficult. As always, the fear of the problem is far larger than the reality of the problem. It's like anything else. It's like Brexit. It's like anything else in the world. The fear of the problem is typically way more prevalent and larger than the reality of the problem. And that's where I stand on this one. So, interested, anyone who has any thoughts on this, any comments, please let me know in the comment section down below. Yeah, it's just interesting whether this idea of self-identification, strikes a bell with people, whether you think you do it in your life today. Is it something you do consciously or unconsciously? Or do you think that it's just an expression? It's just, you are who you are underneath, it's how you dress. And if it's just how you dress, does that also give you the right to act as if you have identified as that gender? It's all very complicated and my mind sort of spins around with the ifs and buts of this one. Ultimately, if I want to use the bathroom, I want to use the bathroom. I don't see why I shouldn't just use the one I'm more comfortable in. But other spaces, I completely understand why people have more concerns about how these things could be done. But again, I think people are protected by laws for that. Anyway, please let me know if you have any comments on this, if there's any questions, or if you have any particular observations. How do you feel about the idea of self-identifying, and whether that's something that should be available to us as individuals to simply state what our gender is? And is that something that should be allowed to change? Can someone say, I'm male today, female tomorrow, and I flip between them? I can say I'm female in my expression to a schedule. Tuesdays tends to be my female day. It's to a bit of a schedule. Now, that maybe wouldn't ring true with some people. Surely, if it's really your identity, then surely you don't have control of it. How can you switch it on and off? Well, I do. So, I'm here, I need to be dealt with. What am I going to do? Which bathroom do I use when I go out? And if you can't answer the question for me, then surely I should just use the one I prefer. Anyway, any comments, please let me know in the comment section down below. As always, feel free to like, share and subscribe to this video. Please click the little bell to stay notified of upcoming videos. You can get me through my email address, which is julietteisnoir@gmail.com, or you can get me through my website, which is julietnoir.uk. As always, thank you for joining me here today, and I look forward to talking to you all again soon. Thanks so much. Bye. Bye.